All right, good morning everybody, and thank you so much for attending this presentation on Charlie Parker and hip hop. You'll notice that it's a slightly different title than what was advertised, but I think as I present the research and talk a little bit more about that, I'll make it clear why I changed the title slightly. I'd like to introduce my colleague here, Mike Titlebaum from the Ithaca College School of Music. We were working together last year, and recently I took a position as guitar instructor at Washington State University, so we're happy to be here representing both of those institutions, and you know, go Cougars for any people who are Cougars fans. So, first I'd like to start with an example of Charlie Parker's playing. For right now, we're just going to stick with the melody and first chorus of solo of the tune Anthropology by Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. And just for the sake of time, I'd like to do this, so maybe we can play that. Of Charlie Parker's Rhythmic Conception. By the way, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. I'd like to talk about embedded accents, syncopation, and the Charleston rhythm in Charlie Parker's playing. So you can see highlighted in yellow here are all the accents that are on the offbeat and create a sense of syncopation. Okay, this is a really important element of jazz, a really important element of Charlie Parker's playing. As you can see, I've listed down below some of the ways that he reaches these accents in his playing. So, oftentimes accents appear on the downbeat, with the offbeats, within 8-note lines, or on longer than on notes that are longer than an 8th note. So, for instance, if we look at this measure right here, you can see right here. This note is longer than an 8th note that ties into beat 1 of measure 5. And then also notes that are 8th notes but may be followed by a rest. So you can see that right here, or right here and right here. Okay. So all of these are different types of ways that Charlie Parker will, different types of places that Charlie Parker will place his accents. Also at the end of an 8th note phrase. So like for instance here, or here. Okay. So these are 3 or 4 different ways that he uses accents in his 8-note lines. And what's important to note here is that oftentimes these accents are approached by an ascending relief. Okay, so you can see that in measure 1, right? Right, all of those accents right there are approached by an ascending relief. And you know, Mike, you know, as a saxophonist, any people who are here to play wind instruments know that when you leap up to a higher note, it naturally comes out a little bit more, right? So that's part of the reason why there are these accents here, but I think it's not a mistake or done unintentionally. It's done to create this feeling of syncopation and this kind of inner rhythmic interplay that we have in these melodic lines. So here's a few other examples in the melody. I'm using a lot of the same principles that I talked about. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it just because you only have 20 minutes or so, but just trust me. Okay. There are also places that we have accents on the beat. So I wanted to point those out. Those are highlighted in pink. I thought it was interesting that during the solo, many more of the accents were on the beat, on strong beats, rather than than in the melody, where many of the accents were on syncopated beats. Okay, so I put that out there because I think that there is a healthy mix of accents both on the beat and on syncopations. Another important inner rhythmic structure that Charlie Parker really likes to use is the Charleston rhythm. So that rhythm sounds like this. Bop, 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 bop. Okay? That's a really important rhythm to jazz. I mean, you go back to Louis Armstrong in New Orleans, where we are today, and he uses that rhythm all the time. You hear it in his playing, and other musicians of that time period. You know, it developed into a dance in the late 1920s and became really popular. So Charleston rhythm is really integral to jazz rhythmic vocabulary. And you can see highlighted in blue here in the first measure at number 1, you can actually see 2 Charleston rhythms laid over the top of each other, which creates a hemiola effect. So, right? So we have 2 Charleston rhythms there, and then another one in the next measure. Charleston again. Right? Again, Charleston. Yeah, I missed one there. But anyway, get the idea. The melody is chock full of these Charleston rhythms. Okay. Also, during the solo, he uses several instances of the Charleston rhythm. One really common riff that you hear all the time that Charlie Parker plays is that kind of double enclosure, and that that gives the feeling of a Charleston rhythm. That's the second one that I just played there. But anyway, I just want to make that clear that this rhythm is really common in Charlie Parker's vocabulary, both in the melody and also in the solo. So now I'd like to transition to hip hop, and I'm going to share some of the ways that hip hop parallels jazz rhythmic vocabulary. Okay. So this is a quote from Robert Glasper. He's a famous jazz pianist who's in recent years done a lot of work combining both the jazz and hip-hop genres in a really interesting way. He says, "Tribe was my gateway to hip-hop. Literally, I got into rap because of a Tribe Called Quest. The funny thing is that it was the jazz connection because it was the first thing I heard when I was like, wait, what's that?" So I'd like to take a quick look at A Tribe Called Quest. This album from 1991, The Low End Theory, was in a lot of ways considered pretty groundbreaking in the way that there's a lot of material in this album that's sampled from jazz recordings. And I think that both hip hop and jazz are Black American music, and they're both Black American genres, so they share that same common lineage from African roots. And I think that recognition by A Tribe Called Quest and a lot of subsequent hip-hop artists is really, you can recognize that by their sampling of jazz material in their music. So let's take a listen to We've Got the Jazz. He samples a recording of Miles Davis playing on Green Dolphin Street. I'm going to start with the volume very low here. See what it sounds like.
When you're feeling restless, I don't really mind if it's over yet, cause the job of resurrectors is to wake up the dead. So pay attention, it's not hard to decipher, and after once you can check out the life.
Okay, and then one other example, this is from Scenario. Samples Jack McDuff's recording of Ghetto.
Here we go, yo. Here we go, yo. So what's the scenario? Here we go, yo. Here we go, yo. So what's the scenario?
Hey yo, go no flip, you go no flip, no check, you smoke can't rap, what do you know?
Okay, so there's obviously this recognition of the tie between jazz and hip hop, at least with this group. There's another example of Ron Carter's bass line being sampled. We just don't have time for this right now. Here are some other examples. Gangstar and Olympian Doom, both of these groups sample jazz very regularly in their hip-hop compositions and mixes. So there are many examples. These are just a few to get you started. Okay, so let's talk about the rhythmic content of hip-hop. This album from 1989, or this single release from 1989, Public Enemy's Fight the Power. And here we can really clearly hear the use of the Charleston rhythm again, right? Fight the power. So let's take a quick listen to this recording.
To make everybody see, in order to fight the power can be. Fight the power. 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 We got to fight the power can be.
Okay, so you can hear that Charleston rhythm present in the chorus of that song. Now if we go to another piece, this is by Tupac Shakur, and it's called Dear Mama. There's several elements of the rhythmic content that we heard in jazz that are also present in this piece. We hear syncopations, which are highlighted in yellow, and then also the use of the Charleston rhythm again, highlighted in blue. In green, I've included a 3B cross rhythm, or a quiniola, and that's is very common in jazz rhythmic vocabulary, but we just didn't find one in the solo that we looked at. So, but take a listen to this.
When I was young, me and my mama had beef, 17 years old, kicked out on the streets. Though back at the time, I never thought I'd see a face. Ain't a woman alive that could take my mama's place. Suspended from school, I'm scared to go home. I was a fool with the big boys, breaking all the rules. Shed tears with my baby sister. Over the years, we was poor and other little kids. And even though...
Okay, so you can hear those rhythmic elements, those accents present in that piece as well. So now I'd like to take a look at Juicy by the Notorious B.I.G. And I'm going to look specifically at the second verse of this song, just for time's sake. And I thought that this verse really had a lot of those jazz elements present within it. So follow along with this recording, and I'll give you a video actually of the rhythms as it goes by.
I made the change from a common thief to up close and personal with Robin Leach. And I'm far from cheap, I smoke dope with my peeps all day. Spread love, it's the Brooklyn way. The Moet and Alizé keep me pissy. Girls used to diss me, now they write letters cause they miss me. I never thought it could happen, this rapping stuff. I was too used to packing gats and stuff. Now honeys play me close like butter play coke. From the Mississippi down to the East Coast. Condos and Queens, in dope for weeks. Sold out seats to hear Biggie Small speak. Living life without fear. Putting 5 carats in my baby girl ear. Lunches, brunches, interviews by the pool. Considered a fool cause I dropped out of high school. Stereotypes of a black male misunderstood. And it's still all good,
Okay, so I'll go through just quickly showing you some examples of the things that we've talked about before, the syncopations on the offbeats, or accented syncopations. We have the Charleston rhythm. Let's just take a quick look at this. It will be too fast to really internalize this, but I'll throw it up on a website if you guys want to check it out more in detail. You can. So highlighted in yellow, we have accented syncopation, right, on the offbeats. And then in blue, we have Charleston rhythm. Here again, accented syncopations. I want to also note that there are accents on the beat, just like they were in Charlie Parker's solo, right? But I'm focusing in on the syncopations because those are really unique to African music, right? And African music with African roots. So I'm pointing those out here. Okay, some more examples. Charleston and syncopation. Okay, so what I decided to do, after listening to this, I hear these similarities in the rhythmic content between bebop and hip hop. And I thought, wouldn't it be kind of interesting if I took the rhythms from Biggie Smalls rapping on Juicy and use them to actually write a new melody that fit a jazz chord progression. So, yeah, that's kind of what I thought the first time. So take a listen to this. This is rhythm changes. George Gershwin originally wrote these changes in 1930, and I composed a new melody to fit the same rhythms from the rap that you just heard. I composed a melody to fit those rhythms. Okay, let's try it. All right. 1, 2. 1, I just want to give a few notes on how I composed this melody. Like we talked about at the beginning of our session, a lot of times the accents are approached by an ascending leap. So for instance, in measure 6, the top example, that's what I did. Actually, in all these examples. So you can see that each of these accents, when I composed the melody, I approached them by an ascending leap. I think that you could just write a random melody that fits these rhythms, but I think that the accents are really integral to the phrasing of Biggie Smalls rapping. So I wanted to capture those also in the melody. Another important aspect to all rapping, pretty much, that I know, and also this piece, is the use of a rhyming scheme, right? And so I also wanted to capture that when I wrote my melodic line, because that's really essential, again, to the phrasing of this piece. So, for instance, Robin Leach and Frog from Chief, I tried to capture that. It's not exactly a rhyme, but you can tell that they're supposed to be connected. That the contour is the same, right, between those two spots highlighted in green. And then when we go down, pissy, diss me, miss me, they're all descending seconds, right? So trying to capture that phrasing within the melodic line that I composed. Again, here's another example. Lunches, brunches. Trying to connect those. Otherwise, I don't think it really captures the phrase of the piece. Here's one where the top line actually, you can see the contour is pretty much exactly the same as the second line, right? So, thought it could happen, this rapping stuff, is the same contour as I was too used to packing gats and stuff, right? Because those two phrases are sort of like an antecedent and consequent phrase. Okay, so I heard some people giggling about putting the melody on it from using the juicy rhythms on rhythm changes. So I kind of thought the same thing, and just because the rhythm changes progression is from the 1930s, and hearing modern lyrics with that chord progression is sort of an interesting juxtaposition. Maybe it doesn't work quite as well. So I decided, let's check out some Robert Glasper and see what kind of chord changes he's using in his melding of hip-hop and jazz. And so I came across this tune from Black Radio called Afro Blue, released in 2012. So I actually used these chord changes to write a new melody using the rhythms from Juicy. Does that make sense? Okay. So I'd like to just give you a chance to listen to this piece really quickly to hear what those chord changes sound like.
Hey, boy, beautiful girl.
Again, we'll move on for time here. First I'm going to show you an example of just me rapping over these chord changes. Now, full disclosure, I'm not a rap artist. So please don't judge the rapping too harshly. And I think it's also important to note, the Biggie Smalls piece, Juicy, is about the experience of a young black man growing up and being expected by people around him to fail at his career and things like that, and him dropping out of high school, and then him overcoming those things and being a huge success, gaining lots of fame and fortune. So although I'm rapping as a white male who has not had these experiences, I just want to make sure I'm respectful to his experience as a black man.
I made the change from a common thief to a close and personal environment leech. And I'm far cheap, I smoke skunk, drop beats all day, spread love, it's the Brooklyn way. Come on, text me, Alizé, keep it busy. Girls used to diss me, now they write letters cause they miss me. I never thought it could happen, this rapping stuff. I was too used to packing gas and stuff. Now honey, fingers close, like butter plate toast.
Okay, so that's just a quick example of that. And then what I decided would be kind of cool is, like I said before, write a new melody that fit these more modern chord changes. And then I pitch shifted my rapping to actually fit those that melody. So what you'll hear here is the rhythms from Juicy to a new melody over the Afro Blue changes. And I've pitch shifted my rapping that you just heard to these new pitches.
I made the change from a common thief to a close and personal environment leech. And I'm far cheap, I smoke skunk, drop beats all day, spread love, it's the Brooklyn way. Come on, text me, Alizé, keep it busy. Girls used to diss me, now they write letters cause they miss me. I never thought it could happen, this rapping son. I was too used to packing gas and stuff. Now honey, let me close like a butter toast. From the Mississippi down to the East Coast, condos and jeans, you know who it is. Seems like I'm living up without fear, putting my parents in my baby girl ear. Lunches, even being like a fool, consider a fool, cause I dropped out of high school. Stereotypes, I'm a black man, misunderstood, and it's still all good.
I want to say thank you again. Thank you to Mike Titlebaum for joining me here. Thank you so much. Thank you to Greg Yasnitsky for supporting me and WSU for funding this book. Just a quick closing remark. I think it's important. Well, I think that this area of research can be explored further. I think there's a lot of potential for collaboration between jazz artists and hip-hop artists to collaborate on something like this. There's a lot of potential here. I also think that as educators and as performers, it's important for us to think about how we keep jazz relevant in today's society. And although it's great to study the music from the 20s through the 60s as kind of the canon of jazz repertoire, perhaps, most of our students didn't grow up listening to jazz, and perhaps are listening to hip-hop music. I think this could be an interesting entry point for a lot of students into jazz. So anyway, thank you so much for coming. Hope you enjoyed it.